In an era when Israel plunged into spiritual darkness, the nation drifted far from its divine heritage. After the death of King Solomon, God's chosen people gradually forgot him under the reign of Ahab, the most corrupt king in Israel's history. The Holy Land bore the grim stains of innocent prophets' blood, ruthlessly pursued and killed by Ahab's cruel wife, Jezebel. The people of Israel abandoned the very name of God, choosing instead to worship lifeless altars crafted from stone and wood. Yet God had not forsaken his people. Deep in the rugged hills of Gilead, he was preparing a divine response. From that desolate, barren land emerged a man destined to reshape history forever: Elijah. His name, meaning "My God is Yahweh," carried a promise of judgment and divine fire. This is the story of the mightiest prophet, who commanded the heavens to withhold rain, summoned fire from the skies, and never faced death. Yet, it is also the tale of the man behind the prophet, a man burdened by fears, doubts, and profound loneliness. Elijah was human, and his greatest struggle was not against kings or armies, but within himself, battling the doubts and isolation that gnawed at his soul until they nearly broke him. For many years, he lived in solitude, hidden among the barren mountains of Gilead, roughly 100 miles from Samaria. He was neither a warrior nor a priest. Clothed in simple garments of camel hair, his face framed by a thick beard, his eyes burned with an otherworldly fire that hinted at his divine purpose. One day, God revealed Elijah's calling, ending his long season of waiting. With unwavering resolve, he rose, descended the rocky slopes, and journeyed straight to Samaria, the corrupt heart of Israel, where King Ahab ruled alongside Jezebel. As he approached the palace gates, the soldiers stationed there froze, gripped by an unseen power, allowing him to pass as if the very air parted before him. Elijah strode through the grand corridors of the throne room, unannounced and unescorted. Servants shrank back with each step he took. The towering columns, which had witnessed the presence of kings and ambassadors, now stood as silent witnesses to something extraordinary. A wild prophet, without crown or sword, driven by the hand of God himself. There, seated on his throne, was Ahab, surrounded by advisors, idols, and hollow vanity. Before the king could question this stranger's identity, Elijah stood boldly before him and spoke words that would seal the kingdom's fate. "As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the coming years, except by my word." A heavy silence fell, sharp as divine judgment. No one dared to breathe. Elijah, needing no response, turned abruptly and vanished as swiftly as he had come. Ahab remained motionless, neither ordering his seizure nor cursing him, struck silent by the prophet's authority. Then it began. The clouds vanished from the sky, the air grew dry and stifling, and the heavens above sealed shut, as if a divine hand had closed a celestial gate. As Elijah departed, God spoke to him again. "Leave this place and go eastward. Hide by the brook Cherith, east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have commanded ravens to bring you food there." Without hesitation, Elijah obeyed, heading east as the land withered in his wake. The gentle breezes that once cooled Israel's fields ceased, and the morning dew that had nourished the earth vanished entirely. Elijah's journey to the brook Cherith marked the onset of a divine judgment that would test the nation's faith. The brook, a narrow stream winding through the dry hills near the Jordan River, became his refuge. There, in solitude, God sustained him through miraculous means. Each morning and evening, ravens, birds considered unclean by Jewish law, arrived, carrying bread and meat in their beaks. They delivered these provisions to the prophet, a testament to God's power to provide through unlikely instruments. Elijah drank from the brook and ate in silence, his days blending into weeks as the drought tightened its grip on Israel. The land, once fertile and vibrant, began to wither under the relentless sun. Fields that had once yielded abundant harvests turned to dust, and the nation's pride crumbled under the weight of God's decree. Ahab's kingdom, steeped in idolatry, faced the consequences of its rebellion. Yet Elijah remained hidden, safe by the brook Cherith, a symbol of God's enduring faithfulness to those who obey his call. His solitude reflected the spiritual barrenness of Israel, yet it also highlighted God's ability to sustain his servant in the midst of desolation. The prophet's bold confrontation with Ahab and his retreat to Cherith set the stage for a divine drama that would unfold across Israel. Elijah's declaration of drought was not merely a punishment, but a call to repentance, a plea for the people to return to the God they had forgotten. His unwavering obedience, even in the face of a corrupt king and a hostile queen, demonstrated the power of a life fully surrendered to God's purpose. The raven's daily provision underscored a truth that echoed through the ages. God provides for those who trust him, even when the world around them crumbles. As the drought deepened, the contrast between Israel's rebellion and Elijah's faithfulness grew starker. The nation's wells dried up, and its fields became barren, yet Elijah remained sustained by God's hand. His story, rooted in the hills of Gilead and the palace of Samaria, is a testament to the clash between human frailty and divine power. The prophet's journey, from a hidden life in the mountains to a bold stand before a king, reveals a man chosen not for his strength, but for his willingness to obey. Elijah's name, a declaration of God's sovereignty, became a beacon of hope in a land shrouded in darkness, signaling that God's judgment and mercy were at work, even in the bleakest of times. The sun blazed relentlessly, scorching the fields of Israel, turning a once proud and fertile nation into a withered shadow of its former glory. God's judgment had begun, and for 3 long years, not a single drop of rain would fall upon the earth. As the kingdom succumbed to drought, Elijah the prophet traversed rugged hills and valleys until he reached a secluded refuge, the brook Cherith. Nestled among the arid hills near the Jordan River, this brook was a mere ribbon of water, cutting through the earth like a faint scar, winding its way past dry rocks and dusty shrubs. Here, in this hidden oasis deep within the desert, Elijah settled, and with each sunrise and sunset, a miracle unfolded. At dawn, as the first rays of light stirred in the east, the silence of the sky was broken by the flutter of wings. Ravens, black-feathered birds deemed unclean by Jewish law and despised by men, appeared on the horizon. In their beaks, they carried bread and meat, delivering them to the prophet. They settled near Elijah, placed the food before him, and then took flight, vanishing into the sky. This divine provision occurred morning and evening, as the hills glowed amber in the fading sunlight. In profound solitude, Elijah ate in silence and drank from the brook, watching days blend into weeks and weeks stretch into months. Meanwhile, the drought, like a silent curse, cast its dark shadow over all of Israel. Wells ran dry, fields turned barren, and animals collapsed, exhausted, onto the cracked earth. From his throne, King Ahab issued desperate orders to find the man he blamed for the kingdom's ruin. Yet no news of Elijah reached him. The prophet remained concealed by the brook Cherith, shielded by God's hand. Gradually, however, Elijah noticed a change. The stones, once submerged in the brook, began to emerge like small islands along the riverbed. The once steady current dwindled to a mere trickle. The drought he had prophesied was now reaching even his sanctuary. One morning, as he bent to drink, he found no water. Only dampness lingered between the stones. The brook Cherith had dried up. Yet Elijah did not panic or complain. He clung to his faith, waiting patiently for God's guidance. At last, the Lord's voice spoke clearly. "Arise, go to Zarephath in Sidon and stay there. I have commanded a widow there to care for you." This was a perilous mission, for Zarephath lay in the heart of Jezebel's homeland, where the queen had sworn to destroy God's prophets. But Elijah did not hesitate. He rose, wrapped his cloak tightly around him, and began the arduous journey. The sun beat down mercilessly, battering cracked fields and lifeless trees. The drought spared nothing, and all living things seemed to bow under the weight of the judgment Elijah himself had proclaimed. After a grueling trek, Elijah arrived at the gates of Zarephath. There he saw her, a frail woman dressed in tattered rags, gathering dry sticks. Her face was etched with weariness, her hands cracked from toil, her eyes heavy with defeat. A stirring in his spirit confirmed it. This was the widow God had spoken of. Approaching her, Elijah spoke with a calm voice, his face weathered by the harsh sun and desert winds. "Please bring me a little water in a jar so I may drink," he said. The woman, unaware of his identity, turned to obey. But before she could take another step, Elijah added, "And please bring me a piece of bread in your hand." She stopped, her eyes dropping to the ground, and with a trembling voice replied, "As surely as the Lord your God lives, I have no bread. All I have is a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a pitcher. I was gathering these sticks to prepare one final meal for myself and my son. After that, we will die." In that still moment, a truth deeper than the drought itself emerged. The crisis was not only in the parched skies, but had seeped into hearts, stripping them of hope. Elijah responded gently, "Do not be afraid. Go home and do as you have planned. But first, bake a small loaf of bread for me and bring it here. Then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: The jar of flour will not run out, nor will the pitcher of oil run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain upon the earth." The woman stood in silence, facing a choice. She could cling to the little she had left or trust the words of this stranger. Her decision would test her faith in a land where hope was scarce, and the promise of God's provision hung in the balance. Faced with a harrowing choice, the widow of Zarephath stood at a crossroads. She could cling desperately to the scant flour and oil she had left, preserving them for one final meal. Or she could release her fear and trust the words of a stranger. She could face death with quiet dignity, or obey this mysterious wanderer and see what might unfold. Rejecting the idols of Baal, the false gods of her people, and even her own instincts, she chose to believe the dusty prophet, whose eyes burned with a depth that seemed to have witnessed eternity. Returning home, the widow lit a fire, poured the last of her flour, mixed it with the dwindling oil, and baked a small loaf. When she checked the jar, the flour remained, and the pitcher of oil did not run dry. That day, she, her son, and Elijah ate together. The miracle continued the next day, and the day after, sustaining them for many days. But tragedy struck without warning. The widow's son fell gravely ill, his fever escalating until his breaths grew faint. Within hours, the boy stopped breathing altogether. Devastated, the widow sank to her knees. her heart shattered. The man who had brought hope and sustenance to her home now seemed to herald death. "Have you come to remind me of my sins?" she cried through tears, her voice breaking with anguish. "Have you come to take my son's life?" Elijah offered no words in response. Instead, he gently lifted the lifeless boy into his arms and carried him to the upstairs room where he stayed. Laying the child on the bed, he cried out to heaven with raw desperation. "My Lord and my God," Elijah pleaded, "have you brought calamity upon this widow who welcomed me by taking her son?" Then, in an act unprecedented among prophets, he stretched himself over the boy's body 3 times, as if willing his own life into the child. With fervent urgency, he prayed, "O Lord, my God, let this child's life return to him." A heavy, unbearable silence followed, stretching on until at last the boy's chest rose, his lips parted, and breath flowed once more. Elijah carried the living boy downstairs and presented him to his mother, declaring, "See, your son is alive." In that moment, the widow regained more than her child. She reclaimed her faith. Tears streamed down her face as she exclaimed, "Now I know you are truly a man of God, and the words of the Lord from your lips are true." In a land where altars burned for gods of stone and flame, a spark of true faith ignited, piercing the darkness of pagan worship. Yet the drought persisted, unyielding. For 3 long years, not a single drop of rain fell, and God's judgment lay like an open wound across Israel. Livestock perished, wells dried up, and harvests faded into distant memory. Hunger first gripped the poor, but soon even the wealthy felt its sting. Amid this despair, not all succumbed to the worship of Baal. Among the faithful was Obadiah, King Ahab's steward, a man who had witnessed the king's cruelty but refused to remain idle. While Ahab and Jezebel persecuted and slaughtered the Lord's priests and prophets, Obadiah took a daring stand. He hid 100 of God's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, secretly providing them with bread and water. Day after day, he risked his life out of devotion to his God, all while maintaining Ahab's trust, concealing his actions from the king's wrath. One morning, Ahab summoned Obadiah with a desperate command. The drought's relentless grip tightened, turning fertile fields into barren wastelands. The once vibrant nation withered under the scorching sun, its rivers and streams reduced to dust. Elijah, hidden by God's hand, remained a mystery to Ahab, who searched frantically for the prophet he blamed for Israel's plight. The widow's miracle at Zarephath stood as a testament to God's provision, even in a land steeped in idolatry. Her choice to trust Elijah's words over her fear mirrored the faith God sought from his people, a faith that defied scarcity and despair. The ravens at Cherith and the unending flour and oil at Zarephath revealed God's power to sustain his servants through the most unlikely means, even as the nation faced divine judgment. Elijah's encounters, from the brook to the widow's home, underscored the clash between human frailty and divine faithfulness. The widow's obedience, despite her dire circumstances, mirrored Elijah's own trust in God's command to journey into enemy territory. Her son's restoration was not merely a physical miracle, but a spiritual awakening, affirming Elijah's divine calling. Obadiah's courage, risking all to protect God's prophets, reflected the steadfast faith of those who refused to bow to Baal. Together, these acts of obedience and trust stood as beacons of hope in a land shrouded in darkness, pointing to a God who never abandons his people, even in their rebellion. As the drought stretched on, Israel's suffering deepened, yet the faithful few held firm. Elijah's presence, though hidden, loomed large, a constant reminder of God's impending judgment and mercy. The widow's renewed faith and Obadiah's secret defiance foreshadowed the greater restoration God would bring. The miracles at Zarephath and the courage in the caves were not mere acts of survival, but declarations of God's sovereignty over a wayward nation. Elijah's journey, marked by solitude, obedience, and divine encounters, set the stage for the dramatic confrontation that would soon unfold, challenging Israel to return to the God they had forsaken. King Ahab, desperate to save his dwindling livestock, issued a command to his steward Obadiah. Travel the land, search for any grass, springs, or streams not yet dried up. Perhaps we can save our horses and mules. Maybe something still survives. Obadiah set out across the ravaged kingdom, traversing barren, lifeless fields under a merciless sun. Suddenly, amidst the dusty road, he saw a figure, tall, resolute, with eyes blazing like ancient fire. It was Elijah. Overwhelmed, Obadiah fell to the ground, exclaiming, "Is it you, my lord Elijah?" "It is I," the prophet replied calmly. "Go tell your master, Elijah is here." Obadiah rose slowly, his breath stolen by fear, his eyes reflecting deep anguish. "What have I done to deserve this?" he pleaded. "If I tell Ahab you're here and the Spirit of the Lord takes you elsewhere, leaving me unable to produce you, he'll kill me." Leaning closer, Obadiah revealed his secret. "I have served the Lord faithfully since my youth. When Jezebel slaughtered the Lord's prophets, I hid 100 of them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and provided them with bread and water. I've done all I could, Elijah, and now you ask this of me." Elijah stood unwavering, his voice resolute. "As surely as the Lord of hosts lives, whom I serve, I will stand before Ahab today." Obadiah, recognizing the divine authority in Elijah's words, obeyed despite his racing heart. He returned to the palace and delivered the astonishing news. Elijah has returned. The prophet who had sealed the heavens, humbled the king on his throne, and vanished without a trace was back. Without hesitation, Ahab climbed into his chariot and rode toward the appointed place. Under a blazing sun, across fields cracked and barren from 3 years of drought, the two men met. Ahab broke the silence with contempt. "Is that you, troublemaker of Israel?" Elijah met the king's gaze unflinchingly and retorted, "I am not the one troubling Israel. You and your father's house are, for you have forsaken the Lord's commands and followed Baal." With bold conviction, Elijah issued a challenge. "Summon all Israel to Mount Carmel. Bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who dine at Jezebel's table. Today, we will see who is truly God." Ahab accepted, and preparations for the confrontation began. Word spread swiftly across Israel, drawing thousands from every corner of the kingdom to Mount Carmel. Elders and youths, priests and soldiers, farmers and shepherds. None wanted to miss the impending spectacle. At the mountain's summit, tension hung thick in the air. On one side stood nearly 1,000 prophets of Baal and Asherah, clad in garish robes adorned with pagan symbols. On the other stood Elijah alone, his cloak worn thin by sun and wind, a solitary figure radiating divine purpose. Raising his voice with sorrow, Elijah addressed the crowd. "How long will you waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him." The people fell silent, as if shame sealed their lips. Stepping forward, Elijah outlined the challenge. "I am the only prophet of the Lord left, while Baal has 450 prophets. Bring 2 bulls. They will choose one, cut it into pieces, and place it on the wood without lighting a fire. I will prepare the other bull, place it on the wood, and also light no fire. You call on your God, and I will call on the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is the true God. The prophets of Baal went first. They prepared their altar, slaughtered their bull, and laid it on the dry wood. From morning until noon, the 450 prophets screamed, leaped, and danced wildly around their altar, invoking Baal's name. Their cries echoed across the mountain, but no response came, not even the faintest sign. Baal remained utterly silent, his powerlessness exposed. As the sun reached its zenith, Elijah watched the futile display and began to mock them with biting sarcasm. Shout louder. Perhaps Baal is busy or he's wandered off. Maybe he's sleeping and needs waking. The prophets' frenzy intensified, their voices growing hoarse, their movements more desperate. But the heavens remained unresponsive. The crowd watched, the silence of their false god deafening. Elijah's solitary stand, rooted in unwavering faith, set the stage for a divine demonstration that would shake the nation. The drought, a symbol of God's judgment, had brought Israel to this moment, where the true God would reveal himself against the backdrop of a people torn between idolatry and faith. Shout louder, Elijah taunted. Perhaps Baal is preoccupied, or he's wandered off. Maybe he's sleeping and needs to be roused. In a frenzy of desperation, the prophets of Baal intensified their grim ritual, their cries growing hoarse as they slashed themselves, blood streaming freely down their bodies. The afternoon dragged slowly across Mount Carmel, yet no response came from their God. No fire descended, no sign appeared. The crowd began to murmur. The futility of Baal's power laid bare before all Israel. Now it was Elijah's turn. The people, weary and disillusioned from the prophet's failure, gathered closely around him. In silence, Elijah took 12 stones, each representing a tribe of Israel, and meticulously rebuilt the Lord's broken altar. With care, he arranged the wood and placed the sacrificial bull upon it. Then, in a bold act defying the 3-year drought, he commanded the people to bring 4 large jars of water, each holding about 5 gallons, and pour them over the sacrifice. They did so once, then twice, and a third time, until the altar was drenched and water filled the trench around it, glistening under the sun. Standing before the assembled crowd, Elijah lifted his eyes to heaven and prayed with fervent conviction. Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, he cried, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, that I am your servant, and that all I have done is by your command. Answer me, Lord. Answer me, so these people may know you alone are God, and that you are turning their hearts back to you. A profound silence followed, heavy with anticipation. Suddenly, a blazing fire roared from the heavens, a fierce, living flame that consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and even the water in the trench, reducing all to dust. A reverent hush fell over the crowd. The people dropped to their knees, overwhelmed, and cried out in awe, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" In that moment, there was no question. Yahweh, not Baal, had answered. Elijah's spiritual authority stood undeniable, and the crowd understood that the drought was a direct consequence of their abandonment of the Lord. The truth shone brighter than ever atop Mount Carmel, illuminating the hearts of a wayward nation. Elijah then turned his piercing gaze to the prophets of Baal, their arrogance now reduced to ashes. He commanded, "Seize them." The false prophets were taken to the Kishon Brook, where God's ancient judgment was executed. purging Israel of those who had led it into idolatry. As the people witnessed this decisive moment, Elijah sensed a stirring in his spirit, something absent for 3 years, the faint whisper of approaching rain. It was a sound no one else could yet hear, but the prophet knew it would soon be undeniable. With authority, he turned to King Ahab. "Prepare your chariot and descend immediately, for I hear the roar of an oncoming storm." Ahab lifted his eyes to a sky still clear and dry, unchanged after years of drought. Yet, he obeyed without question, sensing the weight of Elijah's words. The drought had fulfilled its purpose, and God was ready to open the heavens, pouring out his mercy once more. The events at Mount Carmel marked a turning point. The fire from heaven was not merely a spectacle, but a divine declaration of God's sovereignty. Elijah's solitary stand against hundreds of false prophets showcased his unwavering faith, while the people's response signaled a reawakening of their devotion. The execution at Kishon Brook was a somber act of purification, removing the corrupt influence that had led Israel astray. As Elijah stood on the mountain, his heart attuned to God's voice,